In 1944, the Bretton Woods system was established to replace the gold standard with the US dollar as the global currency. The system ended in 1971 when President Nixon broke the gold peg, but the US dollar remains its global dominance. Over the last 75 years, how the world has changed, what is the Chinese yuan's role in the global monetary system, and how likely will Facebook's Libra change the US dollar's dominance? To discuss these issues and more, I'm happy to be joined in the studio by Mr. Liu Zhiqing, Senior Fellow with the Chongyang Institute for Financial Studies at Renmin University of China. We shall also speak to Dmitry Somakas, Professor of Financial Economics at the University of Oxford via Skype. Professor James Note, a Senior Fellow at World Policy Institute in Shanghai, and Ms. Maria Demertis, Deputy Director of Bruegel in Brussels, both via satellite. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Pan Dong. So, Mr. Liu, we know that since the collapse of the Bretton Woods system, the world entered the era of floating exchange rate mechanism. Let's start with a more current sense. Do you think this system is facing major problems right now?
I think so. I think there's a mechanism of this system is now facing great challenges since ever it happened, because in 75 years, many things have been greatly changed, especially globalization in the past 2 decades has changed a lot in fundamental, especially in the monetary policy making and the monetary exchange, especially in the capital market. There are a lot of fundamentals that changed a lot. So I think the older system should be modified or should be improved to adapt the new currency demand in the new era. Actually, the 2 major demands or challenges are facing by us. First is whether the diversify the currency could be implemented in today's system. This is a very challengeable problem for everyone.
Sorry, you said diversify the currency. You mean the single currency dominance of the international monetary system should be diversified? Are you talking about the dominance of the US dollar?
Yeah, I think we should have a solution that to end the US dollar dominance system. We should have a diversified currency system in today's environment of the globalization, because we need a lot of different alternatives and possibilities to do more business and to improve the business environment. So in this way that we have to see the second challenge we are facing, that all the developing countries, emerging market is now becoming more important. That is a different situation 75 years ago. 75 years ago, all the system is only trying to serve the developed countries or to recover the old traditional powers. They don't have time to pay more attention to the developing area or developing or poor countries. Nowadays, I think the major power of the economic world is more or less dominated by the developing countries. So we should have a new system that how to meet the demands of this developing market.
So let's talk more about development first. On the anniversary of the Bretton Woods system, World Bank Chief David Malpass said actually the Bretton Woods system contributed to the reconstruction of Europe right after the Second World War, because let's remember it was created when the war was still underway, and he admitted that now the world needs a new approach to realize development. But looking at what World Bank has done and is doing right now, do you think that effort is sufficient? And talking about development, what do you make of the emerging institutions, for example, like the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank?
Sure, I think this is a good alternative to the older system. We have to say frankly that the Bretton Woods system has made a great contribution, because at that time we need new regulations to cover all this economic system, to help all the countries to follow one system, one rule to make a business recover. This is really very good design, good architecture, and a good contribution by the Bretton Woods. But actually today's situation is totally different from others. So like the new institutions, there are so many institutions like AIIB and other regional banks, developed banks in the Asian or in Africa areas. So they are also very important to make the gap between the World Bank and other institutions for the business demands. So actually all these new emerging institutions are so important. So I mean that for both sides we need each other to support in business.
Now let's turn to that bigger problem you just mentioned, your very first point, the dominance of the US dollar. You said it should be ended, but do you think that's way too drastic change at this particular moment, or do you think that's a problem that belongs to the future?
The solution belongs to the future, but the processing should belong to today. So we should start the processing to end the dominating of the US dollar, because you see there are advantage and disadvantage at the moment. Well, I have to say the Bretton Woods system has finished its mission, original mission. Now it should have a new mission for new emergent institutions. For instance, the new currencies should come up or emerge to be implemented by the world community. So US dollar dominance could be continued for a while. We should not finish it today or tomorrow. That will make another disaster. So we should have a regularly reform by taking all the activities and the joint efforts by all countries that to have more opportunities and chances equally to all countries that to have a same position in the world economy, especially in the monetary policy.
Now, for more insight on this, let's talk to Professor James Note in Shanghai. Well, Professor, we are talking about a possible diversification of the single currency dominance right now in the international monetary system. So, since we're talking about Bretton Woods, we have to talk about its legacy. Like it or not, its legacy SDR, the special drawing rights system, is still existing with the IMF, but it's now kind of a basket of currencies, including the US dollar, the euro, the Chinese yuan, and the Japanese yen, and also the pound sterling. What do you make of the real function of this system, part of the legacy of the Bretton Woods in reality?
Well, one of the reasons for the dollar dominance is not just the size of the American economy after World War II, but also the fact that the financial markets in the United States, particularly New York, are the most developed in the world. What makes a strong currency and an attractive currency is not just a matter of policy, but a matter of usage. And one of the reasons why it's difficult to replace the dollar in the role it's had in the world economy is because so many businesses and financial institutions rely on dollar-denominated financial assets of all kinds, from bonds to derivatives to forward exchanges, all kinds of financial instruments. By far, the most number of financial assets in the world are dollar-denominated. So it's not just trade. Of course, China is already the world's largest trading country. But it's primarily the financial transactions that make a currency strong and useful for international traders, investors, and so forth. And it's because of that usefulness that the dollar has maintained its role, not because of the strength of the United States as a country or because of any policy reason. It's really more the use in the financial system that makes the dollar so important.
So since you mentioned the financial markets in the US, some are actually saying that it's the very urge of the free flow of capital that partially contributed to the collapse of the Bretton Woods system, and also the rise and the dominance of the neoliberalism in the world even until now. So I know you are an expert in political economy. Tell us, do you think neoliberalism is the dominating ideology behind the US dollar right now?
Yes, and I do agree also that it caused the decline and fall of the Bretton Woods system. The Bretton Woods monetary system only really operated for 13 years. From 1958, when most of the European countries finally liberalized their currencies and abolished exchange controls, until 1971, when Nixon closed the gold window. It really didn't succeed at what it aimed to do, which is keep currencies fixed relative to each other and to make sure countries had adequate reserves to maintain the exchange rate that they'd pledged to. That system broke down a long time ago, and it never really functioned for very long. Even long after it was designed, exchange controls were necessary to maintain stability. So I would say what it indicates is that capital flows tend to overwhelm any kind of system of fixed exchange rates, and that's really what we've seen in the era since 1971, is that the real driver of the movement of currencies and what creates strong currencies is the attractiveness of their financial markets, is their attractiveness of their financial products more than anything else.
So talking about neoliberalism and its dominance, let's talk to Ms. de Mertens in Brussels. Well, Ms. de Mertens, in the latest G7 finance ministers meeting in France, the French finance minister actually called for a more responsible capitalism. Do you think this is in direct contradiction to the very aim of neoliberalism? Because if we go back to the very definition of capitalism, it's about the private ownership of means of production.
Well, yes. I mean, I think the prevailing model in Europe is one of capitalism. That implies that it is the markets that actually drive activity. That is the main thing about capitalism. But the other thing that we have very strongly in Europe, and that is actually becoming only stronger, is that there is a very important role for the state to play in order to guarantee welfare for all. The issue of inclusiveness of growth is very important in Europe, and why we believe in the free market activities in capitalism. At the same time, we also believe in a benevolent state that is preventing market failures. And that's a very important thing in Europe, something that we fought for in wars, to preserve a welfare state that includes and caters for all.
So let's go back to the international monetary system. Do you see the euro as a potential challenger to the dollar dominance?
The euro already has an international role, but it is second, and actually it is a distant second to the dollar. The dollar by far remains the world currency, and the euro is far behind it. Now, it is important to remember why a currency becomes attractive, and I think things that have been said earlier by other speakers are correct, but at the same time, you require a sovereign to back that currency. I cannot emphasize this argument enough. I think the dollar has become a very strong currency because it has the backing of the institutions behind it, and that is the Fed, but also the sovereign behind it, ultimately the US taxpayer. You saw it in the crisis that when there was a financial deficit of funds in the global scene, the Fed stepped up and provided liquidity for financial flows. That requires leadership skills and actually the responsibility. Be prepared to take the responsibility. You need to ask the question, would the ECB be prepared to act in similar ways? If there is a shortage of euros in the global scene, would it be prepared to offer liquidity, euros in other words, to the world in order for transactions to keep on going? For the moment, the ECB is not ready to do that, and no other institution is ready to do that apart from the Fed, and that contributes to the international role of a currency. So for the moment, I think that the dollar supremacy is going to remain.
So you just led us to a very core question here. We've been saying that this is the age of a floating exchange rates mechanism. So the crucial question is, according to what? What do you think? You said US dollar is a strong currency. So what is its nominal anchor? Is it commodity or is it credit?
No, I think it's a combination of things. Of course, the fundamentals of the economy are crucial. If you have an economy that is fundamentally weak, I don't mean in cyclical sense, but I mean in structural sense, then that is a very big negative for the currency. The US remains a strong economy. It is the richest country in the world, and it does remain a very strong economy despite cyclical fluctuations. I think that's a very important thing. Second to that is what was said earlier on, is the demand of the currency for financial flows. If companies, or primarily banks, because they are the biggest economic players in the world, they are attracted to the currency, they will demand the currency. And that, of course, will continue to make it an attractive and expensive currency to hold. But I think it's important to remember that there are institutions behind, and the credibility of these institutions will also add to the attractiveness of a currency. And the US has all these factors that together contribute to the dollar having that feature of a global currency.
What's your take on this, Professor Note? Do you think it's getting more and more difficult for countries to find a stable nominal anchor in this world of uncertainty right now?
Well, it is, because the financial flows that influence relative currency values can be so strong that they overwhelm the ability of especially smaller central banks to manage the currency. We saw this happening, for example, in 1997 with the Asian financial crisis. It happened in many countries during the 2007-2008 crisis, and in lesser examples over the decades. It's very difficult for a country to manage its currency when financial flows are relatively free, and, for example, in a boom time, lots of capital will flow in, and then when all that hot money flows in from abroad and then prices start to fall, that money flows back out again and can accelerate the fall. So in many cases, the foreign sector, in effect, it reinforces the business cycle in a lot of the smaller countries in particular that are buffeted then by the fact that we have a relatively unconstrained financial and currency system.
Well, dear guest, we'll be continuing this right after this. You're watching Dialogue on CGTN. Stay with us. You're watching Dialogue on CGTN, and we're talking about the legacy of Bretton Woods and the challenges in the current international monetary system. For more insight, now let's cross live to Professor Dimitrios Thermikos in Oxford. He's from University of Oxford, and he's an expert in financial economics. Thank you very much for joining us, Professor. So talking about challenges to the current international monetary system, we have to talk about the role of cryptocurrencies, or some may call it digital currency. Many people think it's the same thing. So let's take Facebook's just announced Libra as an example. Now, many countries sees this as a major threat to their financial systems, even to their sovereignty. But interestingly, it's reported that the Chief of Bank of England, Mark Carney, showed some cautious support to Libra. Why is that?
Thank you very much for inviting me. In fact, in order to be able to address the issue of cryptocurrencies and Bretton Woods too, so to speak, we have to understand the deeper definition of fiat money as we know it nowadays. Money is an institutionalized symbol of trust, and as such, the US dollar has a preeminent role in international monetary arrangements that emanated from the Bretton Woods after the Second World War in 1944. Thereby, as such, whenever there is a financial crisis, we have the so-called flight to quality, and flight to quality of capital usually takes the form of getting out of distressed countries and saving in dollars. Thereby, the cryptocurrency as such, it is very, very difficult to replace mainstream fiat money and US dollar in particular as a standardized, institutionalized symbol of trust. Consequently, there are associated regulatory issues with cryptocurrency. For example, what is the purpose, what is the origin and the genesis of the funds that flow the cryptocurrency, and whether the speculative nature that is built into this may engender further financial fragility and may permeate the rest of the financial system, causing financial instability. Thus, there is caution from all the sovereign states, and there is an urgent need for regulation and better understanding about the nature of these speculative assets, which by no means are not means of payment and units of accounts yet. Thank you.
And Professor, having said that, let's go back to the very definition of the currency. So do you think a digital currency can be called a currency in real terms? Because looking at what Facebook has been saying, it's that it said Libra will not threaten the U.S. dominance, and it sees some designated currencies in the IMF SDR basket as nominal anchor. But in its white paper of release, it says it will create a crypto blockchain as a ledger and also create a smart contracts platform. Do you think this kind of statement is self-defeating in purpose?
Well, we have to be able to distinguish between the two main features of cryptocurrency and technology associated. In other words, there is one thing to talk about cryptocurrency and the various forms of cryptocurrencies, and another issue is to talk about fintech, the new financial technology, which is an outcome of the new financial architecture. As such, the blockchain technology and fintech in general will play a substantial role in the future in the capital markets and financial transactions. However, the cryptocurrency as such is not currency. It's a misnomer because fundamentally it's a speculative asset. And the proof of the pudding is, if you see the volatility of prices of these various currencies, that's testimony and that's testament to how speculative these assets are. Moreover, last but not least, we have to disentangle and assess the origin of the funds that flow to all of these cryptocurrencies. And that's a problem of the international financial system that has to be dealt with, and I think that's one of the reasons that central banks and governments are very, very cautious in assessing and adopting this sort of means of transactions.
Thank you very much, Professor Dimitrios Tomakis from the University of Oxford. Now, let's go to Ms. Demirtis in Brussels. So, what's the official attitude from the EU so far on Facebook's Libra? Is it a firm no?
To have the definitive attitude to any cryptocurrencies. I mean, we have to allow for technology to develop and for new means of payments to emerge. The Libra, very much like the Bitcoin, are very much these types of electronic means of payment. The question is whether they're going to be successful means of payment, they're going to be good means of payments, and what kind of risks
sorry,
they
Mr.
pose.
Demirtis, do you think it's only an electronic way of payment? Because look, maybe that's what Facebook's Libra is partially about. But looking at Bitcoin, do you think it's still only a way of payment?
No, I actually think that what the professor said earlier on is correct. It's just an asset. It's the best way to understand what the Bitcoin is, and indeed the Libra aspires to become, is just an asset. And the volatility of the asset will determine its success. But at the same time, because it is digitally available, it has been used as a means of payment as well. But it is not by no means only a means of payment.
Professor Norton, what's your take on this? Do you think cryptocurrencies are a threat to national sovereignty and the very foundation of the current world monetary system?
Not yet, not at all, because of the reasons that have already been stated. I'd also like to add that to the extent that cryptocurrencies have been a means of payment, it's often for illegal transactions because of the nature of their anonymity. And that's also one of the reasons why they lack stability. They lack confidence of the broader trading public and investing public, because the funds flowing in, the funds flowing out, the means in which these actually crypto assets are managed is highly opaque and very difficult to understand and to trust. And there are also, I know from the technical side of it, there are possible ways of hacking and gaming these systems as well. They're vulnerable to different sorts of attacks, though they claim they're not. And so I think there's so many limits to what they can do that they really have acted primarily as speculative assets. And remember, we're also talking about very small quantities. And the amount of, say, Bitcoin in circulation is a tiny, tiny fraction of the currency of any major country. We're talking about very small amounts. Now, if a big company like Facebook gets behind one of these, it might have a little bit bigger circulation. But it's still going to have the problem that the thing that attracts many people to cryptocurrencies, the anonymity, is also what makes it difficult for it to become a broadly useful currency that many people will have confidence in, because the lack of transparency and knowledge about what keeps its value and what influences its value.
Thank you very much, Professor James Note in Shanghai and Ms. Maria de Mertis in Brussels. Now, Mr. Liu, let's continue this topic. We know that China has drawn a red line on the cryptocurrencies on its territory. It's a firm no, right? But looking at what Facebook says, it said, of course, it will not challenge the US dollar dominance, but said it's to compete, libraries to compete Chinese platforms like Alipay and even Tencent's WeChat. What's the angle here from Facebook?
I mean that we have to pay more attention. I'm a little bit very cautious about the functioning of this new currency, because who knows that what will be happening in the future, because we don't know what the real purpose of the behind it. I think it could be potentially a threat to a state sovereignty in the future if it could be used as a payment means in the country. We see that the business and trade now is getting a big volume for any country. If there's no physical reliable currency that is dominating the payment, we use the bitcoins or even the cryptocurrency, that could be very, very dangerous. Technical innovation is something different from the financial inflow and outflow. But if this could be used as currency, as tool of payment, as a currency reserve, that could be really a very potential problem for any country's security and safety. So in this sense, I mean that China had a red line that to use such a currency, because you know Chinese market is so diversified and also so many interest groups that are behind it. If anybody that misuse of this tool, from the tool itself is no problem, it's neutral, but it decided by who made these tools, who want to use this tool. The misuse of this tool is very dangerous by the regulators. So that's why if we don't have a good regulation, we don't have any monitoring system, we don't have a supervising system, that could be very potential danger for any country, especially for China. We have such big populations and different business organizations here, so we should pay more attention to safeguard our system there.
So you just talk about the regulation of emerging technology. So let's pick this specific technology in the whole cryptocurrency idea, that is blockchain and encrypted public ledger. Do you think it can be applied to good use, if you will?
Yeah,
not in financial terms, of course.
Okay, in principle, yes, it could be a good view. So, but actually, in practice, we can see some still uncertainties and many problems are now still discussing. The hot questions now already occurred in Chinese business circles. So some people say, yes, it's a very good, very safe, but some people now are questioning whether this really have a good positive result. My personal view is that there's something still beyond our reality that to take over all this
technology. So it's still up to strong and sound regulation and governance.
That's true.
Thank you very much, Mr. Liu Zhixing from the China Institute for Financial Studies at Renmin University of China. And that's it for this edition of Dialogue on CGTN. I'm Handling in Beijing. Bye-bye.